Few people in history have been as maligned or slandered or projected upon than Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Bathsheba has become quite an interesting way to understand people and their viewpoints. People are telling on themselves about a lot of their implicit assumptions about the nature of men and women, about how they view David, about how they view the issues of consent and sexuality entirely in what they project upon Bathsheba. Who is Bathsheba? What can we know about her? What are we never really told about her? And how should we consider this whole story? Bathsheba, we learn about in terms of David's story in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12, and in 1 Kings chapter 1, and in terms of the story of her son Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 2. When we meet Bathsheba, Bathsheba, we're told, is the daughter of Eliam in 1 Samuel chapter 11 and verse 3. Later on in 1 Samuel, we get the appendix talking about the mighty men of David, his 30 mighty men. We are told that there is an Eliam, the son of Ahithophel the Gilonite, there among the 30 of David. It might be a different Eliam because we can't ever be totally sure of these things when we don't have explicit association. But the fact that Bathsheba is the daughter of Eliam and wife of Uriah, and Uriah is also one of the 30, will make it pretty clear that those are the same Eliams. Ahithophel, as David's advisor, is probably a little older than David. Eliam is maybe a contemporary exact of David. That means that Bathsheba is probably a generation younger than David, which would make sense because she will outlive him. We don't know exactly how old Bathsheba is, but we do well to consider her 20 to 40 years younger than David at this time. She's a very beautiful woman, and she is the wife of Uriah the Hittite. He might be a Hittite, but he is a loyal, dedicated soldier of David and servant of David, and that makes what's about to happen all the more galling. So in the story, David has reached the height of his power. He is now ruling over an empire, the greatest empire Israel would ever know. But the 2 Samuel author tells us, that he has not gone out to war with his army when kings go to war. He sent Joab with the army out to Ammon, to Rabbah. He has stayed home, and one night he is on his roof. And on top of his roof, on top of the town, he is able to see down. And so he can see things from looking up and down than anybody else could from their lower down perspective. And he sees a woman bathing. She's a very attractive woman. Everybody thinks she's on her roof. The text never says she's on her roof. Maybe they bathed on their roof, but maybe they didn't. We don't even know what he saw. He just saw her bathing. We don't know exactly how much of her she saw, but he saw enough to know she was attractive. And even though he was told, when asked, that she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, David sent some messengers to her to get her. And she did come to him, and they had relations. Samuel author is going to tell you that Bathsheba was not trying to, expose herself to David in that bath or clean herself up to go have some licentious fun, that she, in fact, was purifying herself from her menstrual uncleanness. She was observing what the law said, and it's also important because the fact that she, as we'll then send word to David that she is pregnant, means that it had to be from David and from their liaison. It was not from her husband Uriah because she had had a period in between those two times. This does not make David very happy. So what David does is he tries to get Uriah to come back and to hang out for a while. And since he's hanging out for a while, shouldn't he just go home and, have some fun with his wife? Uriah is too good a soldier for that. Uriah stays with the soldiers. And when David asks about this and why he's not going home, he says, am I really supposed to go home and have sex with my wife while the armies of Israel are on the field? I refuse to do such a thing. Uriah is a loyal servant of David. Uriah is faithful. David is unfaithful, and David is trying to hide his unfaithfulness. And this also shows us, by the way, that Bathsheba is not so seductive and enticing as to be unable to be resisted by a man. Her husband Uriah certainly is able to resist her because it's not the right time, because Israel's army is in the field. So David feels like he's got nothing left to do. David will then write to Joab and say, hey, have Uriah get in the middle of the fighting, which would lead to his death. And he gives that message, that death warrant of Uriah, to Uriah himself, confident Uriah won't read it. And Uriah delivers it to Joab as a faithful servant, did not open it, did not look at it. Joab finds a way to make that work and sends word back that it happened. And David, far from the anger he was expecting, Joab is expecting David to show about it, using the example of Abimelech in the past. David, when told this, just says, don't let this thing upset you. There is no way to anticipate whom the sword will cut down. Continue to press the battle. Bathsheba's made known her husband's died. She mourns, the text says. Then, after a period of mourning ended, David took her into his house, made her his wife, and she gave birth to their son. Very important note at the end of that chapter. What David had done upset Yahweh. Nobody else would have known, perhaps, but Yahweh did. So Yahweh sends Nathan the prophet to David. And there's this story that Nathan tells, that there were two men who in a certain city, a rich and a poor one. The rich man had a great many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little lamb he had acquired. He raised it, and it grew up alongside him and his children. It used to eat his food, drink from his cup, sleep in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. When a traveler arrived at the rich man's home, he did not want to use one of his own sheep or cattle to feed the traveler who had come visit him. So instead he took the poor man's lamb and cooked it for the man who had come to visit him. David is enraged. And he goes well beyond what is appropriate. As surely as Yahweh lives, this man who did this deserves to die. Because he committed this cold-hearted crime, he must pay for the lamb 4 times over. He must die? I mean, sure, the rich guy in the story is a jerk, and he certainly should remunerate the poor man, but was it a capital crime to be a jerk? Why is David so fervent about this? We can only wonder. The text does not tell us. But the text tells us, Nathan then says, you are the man. This is what Yahweh God of Israel has said. I chose you to be king over Israel, and I rescued you from the land of the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and put your master's wives into your arms. I also gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if all that somehow were insignificant, I would have given you so much more as well. Why have you shown contempt for Yahweh's decrees by doing evil in my sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and you have taken his wife to be your own wife. You have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. So now the sword will never depart from your house, for you have despised me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite as your own. This is what Yahweh has said. I am about to bring disaster on you from inside your own household. Right before your eyes, I will take your wives and hand them over to your companion. He will go to bed with your wives in broad daylight. Although you have acted in secret, I will do this thing in Israel and in broad daylight. Nathan indicts David. Notice not a word of indictment or guilt was assigned or associated with Bathsheba. David, to his credit, declared, I have sinned against Yahweh. Psalm 51, where Bathsheba is also mentioned in the superscription, because Psalm 51, David wrote in light of Nathan's indictment of him. And David goes so far as to say there that he is sinful from birth, which we should believe are true sentiments that he had. He felt that way. He did have to grapple with the profound depth of the transgression he did here when it came to the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And then Nathan said, yes, and Yahweh has forgiven your sin. You will not die. He deserved death for what he did. Nevertheless, because you have treated Yahweh with such contempt in this matter, the son who has been born to you will certainly die. And that son would die. And then the rest of the story of 2 Samuel will be the story of the consequences, where David would have nothing but difficulty now because he had taken Bathsheba and brought her into his house. Then his son Amnon would rape his daughter Tamar. Then his son Absalom would kill Amnon. Then Absalom would rise up against David, take away the hearts of Israel, sleep with his concubines, draw away Bathsheba's grandfather into it, only to have Absalom die in battle. And thus, David paid fourfold for his sin regarding the wife of Uriah the Hittite. In all of this, we are never told what Bathsheba thought or felt about anything in the whole experience. All that she has done in this story is when she was summoned, she went. When she recognized she was pregnant, she sent word. When her husband was killed, she mourned. She then entered into the house of David. In this story, things are done to Bathsheba more than Bathsheba is doing them. Yet in all of this, Bathsheba's vindication would begin because we are told that after the death of their child, David comforted Bathsheba. We're never told how much comfort Bathsheba took from it, by the way. But David comforted Bathsheba that she conceived, in fact. And she gave birth to a son, and David named him Solomon. Now Yahweh loved the child and sent word through Nathan the prophet that he should be named Jedidiah for Yahweh's sake. And we meet Bathsheba again in 1 Kings chapter 1, where now David has grown very old, so old that he cannot keep himself warm. A young woman, Abishag, is brought to keep him warm, but he never knows her sexually. He is basically impotent without power anymore. Because of that, Adonijah, his son, rises up and says he will be king, and gets Joab and Abiathar to agree to that. And so he goes, proclaims himself king. Nathan, we're then told, goes to Bathsheba and says, do you see that this is happening? Let me give you some advice, he says, so you can save your life and the life of your son Solomon. To go in and tell David some things. Bathsheba goes to David's private quarters. She has not been summoned, but she comes in. She bows down before him, and he tells her to speak, to let him know what she wants. And she says, my master, you swore an oath to your servant by Yahweh your God, Solomon your son will be king after me, and he will sit on my throne. But now look, Adonijah has become king. But you, my master the king, are not even aware of it. He has sacrificed many cattle and steers and sheep, and has invited all the king's sons, Abiathar the priest and Joab the commander of the army, but he has not invited your servant Solomon. Now, my master, O king, all Israel is waiting anxiously to see who is named to succeed my master the king on the throne. If a decision is not made when my master the king is buried with his ancestors, my son Solomon and I will be considered state criminals. These are the most of the words we'll ever hear from Bathsheba. She doesn't crib exactly what Nathan told her. She adds the emphasis, and she's doing this to survive. Because that's what's at stake here, is her survival. Either she survives because Solomon is made king, or if Adonijah is king, there's no hope for their survival. Because, as we'll see, other sons are rivals to the throne and often dispatched afterwards. We will hear that Nathan will then come in and amplify the message. David will then summon Bathsheba in, and it confirms the oath he made. There are some who want to wonder if Nathan and Bathsheba invented this whole cloth. If we believe the witness of all of Scripture, we have to discount that, since the chronicler shows David in 1 Chronicles standing up there in front of all Israel declaring Solomon would be coming after him. And the provisions are made so that Solomon will be anointed king. And Solomon is made king. David will die. Solomon will be established on the throne. And now Bathsheba is succeeded. She's now queen mother. And we're told in 2 Kings chapter 2 that Adonijah, the same one we just heard about, comes to meet her. And she wonders if he's coming in peace. And he says he is. And that he has a request that he would like to make to her. And she says, let it be known. And he goes through a bunch of things and says he'd like Abishag, the woman who was warming up his father, to be given to him as a wife. And Bathsheba responds, good. And then she goes to the king. And we can see Bathsheba's power here. That Solomon, who is receiving honor and deference and bowing from everybody, when she visits King Solomon, he got up to greet her. He bowed to her. And then sat on his throne, had another throne brought for his mother, sat at his right hand. Asked her what she wanted. And he says, please, I have a small request. Do not withhold it from me. And he said, go and ask. I will not refuse you. And he said, allow Abishag the Shunammite to be given to your brother Adonijah as a wife. Then Solomon answered and said, why just request Abishag the Shunammite for him? Since he is my older brother, you should also ask for the whole kingdom, for Abiathar the priest and for Joab. May God judge me severely, he swore, if Adonijah does not pay for this request with his life. And it was asked of Benaiah, and Adonijah was dispatched. And that's the end of what we hear about Bathsheba in the Old Testament narrative. And ever since, chronicler on, people have wanted to pour in what they think about her. All kinds of commentators have shamed themselves by how they have made her out to be some kind of wanton seductress, just itching for that opportunity to get with David, having idolized David well beyond his station, acting like he is just inescapable. When throughout the narrative, we are never told what she thinks. And to suggest that she was invested in it positively is to implicitly, but necessarily, accuse her of adultery, which the text never does. The text always and throughout blames David. David is the one held responsible. David is the one who sinned for this. And David is the one who suffered fourfold because of it. We don't know how Bathsheba felt about all these things. We're not even told what Bathsheba's thinking in terms of the Adonijah situation. Some people want to think that she's just naive, like, oh, okay, well, shouldn't have a problem with her being given to you as your wife, so I'll just ask Solomon, he'll do it. As if then she'd be taken aback by Solomon's response. But we could just as easily read her good as seeing that Adonijah's just signed his own death warrant, and then is game to just go and, hey, I got a small request here for you, son. Why don't you give Abishag to your to Adonijah's wife? And then he just blows up. Why don't you give the whole kingdom? And of course, the whole thing is accomplished. And that rival to the throne is dispatched. We don't know, because the text does not tell us. According to the modern understanding of power dynamics, we can comfortably say David raped Bathsheba. Even the ancient text, even if it may not follow that same definition of rape, the fact that in the text she is never accused or suffers a consequence of adultery suggests that there is a recognition there that there was a sufficient power imbalance that exonerated Bathsheba. That was not what she wanted. We don't know how she felt about Uriah. We don't know how she felt about David. All we know is that she is a survivor, and she is vindicated. It's a strange thing, isn't it, to think that Solomon would be the king after David. He's one of his youngest sons, born of Bathsheba. His older brother died as a consequence of their sin, but Yahweh loved Solomon. And as we saw, Solomon was not the one who deserved to be king. Far from it. He was the youngest, the least worthy according to primogeniture. But David said he would be king, and it was done. And Bathsheba is a survivor. And when we see that last time we hear of Bathsheba, she's in the lineage of Jesus. Because Solomon is the son of David. But Matthew reminds you, by calling her the wife of Uriah the Hittite, of how it was a shameful thing that David had done. But we need to remember in all of this, we never hear what Bathsheba thought or felt about anything that happened to her. And whatever we're going to say about Bathsheba should be understood accordingly. Because we end up telling on ourselves by what we project upon Bathsheba. And is that something that is really honoring the memory of Bathsheba and all that she endured? It's good for us to consider these things. Again, so glad that you've joined us. I'm Ethan. I work with the Adventist Church of Christ. We're disciples making disciples in Los Angeles. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make about Bathsheba, we'd love to hear them here. And if we can be of any further service, please reach out to us at AdventistChurchOfChrist.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. And may the Lord bless and keep you until we're able to meet again.